Hi, my name is John and I'm the founder of Bing's Academy, which is a one-on-one tutoring organization that helps students reach their educational goals. In less than a week, it will be the New South Wales Selective High School exam in 2024, scheduled on May the 9th. And there are more than 15,000 students expected to do this exam on that particular morning. Students are all making sure that they're getting prepared and ready because the advantages of getting into New South Wales Selective High School is quite clear, especially if you've been following this channel. Today, I'll be going through how this year's exam that's still being on paper is actually an advantage and beneficial compared to students who are going to be doing the exam next year and beyond. I'll also be sharing some last minute tips and tricks for those people who are attending this upcoming exam later this week too. This year will be my 10th year of teaching students, and as someone who attended Penrith High School and then transferred later on to Girraween High School, I have a lot of personal experience even with the new selective format. Let's get into it. The reason why students who are doing this exam in 2024 later this week have a bit of an advantage, in my opinion, compared to in future years, is because this test is still being done on paper. Ever since we had this new format that's created by Cambridge Assessment, there's been talks of transitioning the existing New South Wales selective exam to an online format after the very first year. But ultimately, this has been stored for years. This is also the case during COVID, where despite this, tests were still being done on paper, although the venues were tweaked into different areas. For students doing the selective or the OC test in 2025 and beyond, the test will be online, and it will be the very first year that they'll have this format. It will be inevitable for the shift and with more preparation required to go along as well. For students who are doing the test this year, there are going to be some key information that should be taken into account that are unique to this particular exam format still being done on paper and can be useful in terms of preparation. The ability to physically interact with the test paper can't be understated. On paper, students can make annotations on the paper or jot down notes directly on it. So this is going to be a format that they're going to be more familiar with and more used to. For example, if a student is preparing for the reading comprehension section, and that involves not just understanding the text, but also quickly referring back to relevant information throughout the passage, when it comes to the paper exam format, students are likely not going to be as stressed, as most students would have practiced with paper exams and created a system of annotations or symbols that work best for them to assist with that. For example, going back to the reading comprehension example that we're talking about, students might encounter a paragraph filled with critical dates and names in the closed passage section of reading comprehension. They could easily underline these details and write brief notes in the margins or even on the sides of it, such as the letter D to represent a key date or the letter P to represent key people, to easily and assist them to answer these closed passage questions. Another scenario involves the mathematical reasoning portion of the test. Here, when students come across a multi-step algebra problem, they can put a dot next to a time reminder like +2 minutes next to each of the questions to signify that they should dedicate and come back to this time and spend 2 additional minutes on it. They can still put down an answer, but when they come back to this question again, they know that these extra 2 minutes is likely going to be required because the existing time that they spent on it would not have been enough to solve it accurately. The mathematical reasoning and reading comprehension exam shows that it has the potential to manage your time effectively with the right annotations, which is why it can be seen as a benefit. One important point is to not experiment with annotations that you've not been already doing though. If you're not used to annotations, but just stopped using it temporarily, then it might be a great reminder to implement them again. If you have never done this before, don't try just a few days prior to the exam on Thursday. Otherwise, chances are it won't go well for you. It's hard for you to get used to it, and if anything, it could backfire and result in you wasting time and being the totally opposite of what we're aiming for. And essentially, you could actually be disadvantaging yourself. With the first point being the power of annotations, now let's talk about how we could have the ability to save students time in the 2024 exam. But what is the ideal style of annotations? I personally believe that students can develop their own personal system for annotations when it comes to the more complex questions, like a star if you guessed it, or a question mark if you need further review, or even a cross to eliminate certain answer options that may not be accurate. I don't think annotation should necessarily be done for every single question, but it is good practice to employ for the harder ones. Otherwise, it can be a waste of time if you're annotating every single question. Although those are just examples. For the thinking skills section, you may put a circle next to each of the questions to indicate if you need extra time, especially since we only are allocated a minute per question. Perhaps when you put that circle, you give it another look or review, or you might put a single squiggly line to indicate that you've narrowed down between 2 or 3 answer options, but you're not entirely sure still. For thinking skills as well, there is also spatial reasoning questions. Shapes can be interpreted and flipped in different directions. When this is an online test, it can be harder to visualize this mentally. On paper, it's a different story. Then quickly jot down diagrams or arrows to indicate potential changes in directions. If this was an online question, there's likely not going to be the same functionality for you to make these annotations. They may still give you paper, so you can look at the screen and then write it down, but it's not going to be as seamless as the students who are doing it this year, who can put the working out directly on the paper and not have to spend time on drawing or outlining the particular shape again, since it's already provided. Labeling certain parts of a diagram or a picture that's already provided is generally a lot more simpler compared to writing it from scratch, which would be the case if it was an online exam. This not only keeps the work more organized, but ultimately allows for easier revision of steps if there's time left over, and it will save time because you don't have to write the whole shape again. But again, this is the example for spatial reasoning questions, but it could also be applied for other mathematical reasoning questions too. You may also ask, how does a paper exam benefit in terms of writing? Well, this is actually probably the biggest benefit, because when it comes to writing tasks, being efficient with planning is absolutely crucial. For instance, when tackling a persuasive essay, students should quickly draft an outline with bullet points. The letter I for introduction, P1 for point 1, P2 for point 2, C for conclusion, and so forth. Next to each of these, the students may then write down whatever point that they're thinking about and ensure that their points are relevant to the question, yet are distinct to each other. This is the power of planning. Students who jump straight into their writing may believe that they're saving time because they don't actually have to plan and write something like that. They can get right into it. But quick comments with bullet points can be very effective and result in higher marks in general. If the actual selective test was tasking the student to do a persuasive speech, for instance, you may write down 3 distinct points, P1, P2, P3, and flesh it out in a little bit more detail in your actual response later on. If in the draft you notice that a point is essentially the same as another point you mentioned, this means you can have the chance to pivot before you start your response, ultimately saving you time and getting you more marks. This can help maintain focus and structure in your writing. For narrative pieces, a mini storyboard or even a mind map can be applied. Writing is the one area in which annotations can be applied on the paper itself, and it's likely going to be very helpful. Imagine if you had to do a mind map if the test was online. It's just not going to be efficient or appealing having to type or actually write that, especially if a student is a visual learner and prefers to actually visually draw it. I mentioned bullet points because we don't need complete sentences when it comes to planning. I honestly believe that it is a waste of time to write complete sentences when it comes to planning or the draft, because the marking or the draft time, is not marked at all. We just need to do the minimum in terms of planning, so you are aware of what you need to write before you do the actual response. Understanding the question is crucial for this, so underlining keywords and even the text type of the question should be done. Therefore, I can see how students who are likely going to do this exam this year will have an advantage compared to future students who are going to type out the responses, and their plan is not going to be as visually appealing compared to students who did it this year and before. Imagine if you had to type out 2 pages worth in half an hour. That's what they do in NAP, but it's not easy for some students who have a slower typing speed. It is still unclear whether the 2025 writing exam is going to be entirely online, but since they're still determining and testing it, in my opinion, if it's not, it would definitely be applied and typed from 2026 onwards. But since NAPLAN is, I can absolutely see how the New South Wales selective exam in the future will follow suit. In conclusion, although the 2024 New South Wales selective exam is done on paper, it is undoubtedly still going to be very competitive. With careful use of annotations, students who are comfortable and familiar with this can potentially take advantage of having this option compared to future students who are limited to online test formats. Ultimately, there are different annotations that can be used in the reading, mathematical reasoning, or even the thinking skills exam to help save and assist with time management. In writing, it can be a complete game changer in ensuring your plan is correct and you're not rewriting the same point, but just rewording in a different way. Remember that just because it can be very practical and useful, if you've not actively used annotations before, try to not experiment it just for the sake of doing it. It can backfire really badly and could and it may be best to stick with what you are most comfortable with and just do slight tweaks in your final preparation. If you like this video, put a like to it and subscribe if you haven't already. Best of luck for any of the students that are doing this exam this year. Write down any questions that you have, if you had any advice for any of the students, and post-exam, write down how you found it. Best of luck, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.